Hello and welcome to episode 3 of our series on vehicle architecture. Today we'll discuss the application views and regional preferences. I'm joined again by Raul. So thanks, Raul, for being here. It's great to have you. And in our last episode, we specifically explored how the architecture impacts different vehicle classes.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here again.
Right. So just to start, I'd say like, hey, what's the genesis of zonal architecture? What vehicle types get impacted from both current and sort of a future standpoint, who's moving towards zonal architecture and who remains within the central systems. That's the points to ponder upon. And while there are different applications to consider, but I'd say we sort of zero down on discussing passenger cars versus commercial vehicles because that makes more sense. Like if I talk about commercial vehicles, trucks, off-road vehicles as well. Now, while we differentiate the architectural requirements for these different vehicle types or applications that we're talking about,
Mhm.
I'd say passenger vehicles, whether ICE or electric, are I do see them moving towards the zonal architecture side or adopting that. Now, however, it's I'd say it's been a slower start for commercial vehicles. I've seen them sort of talking about it. It's they're exploring it. But I'd say it'd be interesting to explore where each stands. Now, I know how they're progressing and how they influence one another, but let's dive into sort of the distinction and who's sort of leading the way and what's impacting each of them. And
Yeah. Well, and really to start this piece of the conversation, let's remember that we're not only discussing passenger cars, as you mentioned, we're also talking about commercial vehicles, and we're also talking about vehicles with engines and then vehicles without engines. So it's more complicated than talking about one single thing.
okay, so it's like I'd say it's like a matrix. You talk about a matrix view then.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so really the starting point, when you think about it this way, is that passenger cars have traditionally have 12 volts, while commercial vehicles run on 24 volts. So that's already a difference. Now, uh, everyone is moving to higher voltages because we have electrification of the vehicles, etc. And then separate to that, we have vehicles with engines and without engines. On the side of the engines, you essentially have IC, which is normal vehicles, if you will, and then you have hybrids. And hybrids really, there's different flavors, but essentially they have a battery pack that allows them a certain amount of distance and speed to work as an electrical vehicle. Within that, I would highlight the plug-in hybrids because those are vehicles that you have to plug in order for the battery to be fully charged. But those are the vehicles that do allow for long distance and high speeds as an electrical vehicle only.
No, no, absolutely agree. I'd say that the way you've put it, that it does seem right.
And maybe just to uh, put it in a from a different perspective, I already mentioned, right? Plug-in hybrids require physical charging.
Yeah.
That's there. That's one thing that they have in common with battery electrical vehicles that you do require uh, uh, to be plugged in. So on one hand, you have plug-in hybrids that require physical charging, and then on the other side, it's battery electrical vehicles and fuel cell electrical vehicles that don't have engines.
Hmm.
So battery operated electrical vehicle, you have to plug it in. And that's
Right.
how the batteries get charged. I mean, they do get a little bit from regen. And then fuel cell electrical vehicles are the ones where it's not that you have to plug it in, but you have to refuel the hydrogen, uh, and it's still operating as an electrical vehicle, right? But it's the fuel refueling piece.
Correct.
And so on the side of not having an engine, it's the primary difference is just how it's powered. Again, electrical vehicles, you have to charge them. fuel cell electrical vehicles, you have to refuel, and that's
Right.
it.
Right. And considering both these vehicle applications, right, passenger, commercial, each has its own journey and path and
Mhm.
their own customer base as well. So, is one moving faster towards a particular type of architecture as compared to the other? Do they have influence over each other? For example, batteries, I know, play a significant role in shaping this
Yeah.
architecture, but are they sort of many factors at play here, or each vehicle type has its own development path and technological advancement route?
Yeah.
Now, what?
No, and
Yeah, and no, and absolutely, I'd say that. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
no, and I was going to say, yeah, that's a very important question. So, the short answer is, yeah, the forces are the same. It's just the main difference is that the speed of adoption is very different. On passenger cars, you're driving a lot of it uh, just because of the speed of the change that's required to go to electrical vehicle. And so, and we already spoke about this, but
Yeah.
when you think about how you have to manage more complicated vehicles, and then how you have to maintain that familiar experience, you know, all those things, they push you into simplifying the complexity by using modular architectures. And then even on electrical vehicles, fuel cells, you still have to focus on the that user experience, but where the main difference is just charging versus refueling, um, rather than the driving experience, right? Commercial vehicles, I don't want to say it's exactly the same, but it's very, very similar. It's just it's
Right.
a lot slower, and that's because the demand is not as high as with passenger cars. That's at the simplest level, that's the difference.
So, in a nutshell, it's a matter of understanding. So, whether you're understanding the driver and consumer expectations or the relevance as they influence how sort of both these applications, so I'd say passenger and commercial vehicles, approach architecture, or however, I'd say a key factor to sort of ponder upon or take note of is that the impact of the regional influences. Now, I don't know
Mhm.
how big an impact this is, but is there, like, say, OEMs often have global operations but employ, say, different regional strategies? How do these strategies play into development of the vehicle class and architecture? How do regional expectations and sort of market dynamics impact their approach? So I'd say maybe these are some of the places that we could zero down on as well.
And just to clarify, you're asking me, is there a difference in how you approach electrification or the architecture behind electrification?
Well, I'd say the latter.
Okay. So the biggest challenge really to for this whole discussion about architectural passenger car or commercial vehicle is really the software, because
Mhm.
it's through the software that you really are managing and coordinating all the different uh, architectures that exist within a vehicle. So what it comes down to is the ability of the automaker to create software that can do all those things, that can integrate all the components within the zone and then can integrate all the zones.
Mhm.
So it's easy, relatively easy for an automaker just to stick to central architecture and then that's it. It gets more complicated when you go to modular on the software side. So I would argue that really the shift is not a regional shift, but it's just how comfortable does the automaker in question feel about their software capabilities. That's it.
Right. Absolutely. And I thought as much that you'd go down that direction of looking at this from a sort of another perspective. How do you feel like the race towards adopting this new architectures? Is there sort of North American OEMs leading that pack? Are they European, Japanese, or Korean leading the pack? Who's sort of falling behind? Or is it not a region question? It's everyone progresses based on their strategies, and it's very different. But I think one thing that will be interesting to unearth is What is this expected to reach? Where are they expected to reach in the next few years?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the answer it really depends.
Okay.
Uh, but I would argue that startups are in a much better position, and it's mostly because they don't have the legacy constraints of the legacy automakers, um,
Mhm.
and they're also attracting younger talent that, in general, has a much stronger software background. So that in itself, in general, gives them the edge over developing modular architectures.
Great, great. And I'd say this is great insights, Rahul. Brings us to the end of episode 3. Thanks for joining me again, and it was like always a delight to speak to you and understand and unearth the impacts on applications and at a regional level. Although we understand that the regional cap isn't something that is big today, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And to our viewers, join us for the episode 4, where we'll also talk about how this impacts drivers and impacts of changes in electrical architecture. So stay tuned.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thanks.